June 24, 1941. Somewhere behind the British fighting lines in the Sahara Desert, the thick metal sheeting was meant to stop gunfire. That was the main purpose of having armor. But when the friendly repairmen shot standard rifles at a German military vehicle they had taken, they saw the bullets pass right through these sides. The 8 millimeters of steel, set at sharp angles, and advertised by German publicity as protection on the battlefield, was failing completely against the special heavy rifle bullets. Before we continue, show your support by subscribing and letting me know where you're watching from. The Sd.Kfz 222 Scout Car, Germany's normal light spying vehicle, had a secret flaw that would worry every enemy soldier who found it out. The vehicle itself looked tough. The sharp metal plates gave it a unique shape like a diamond. The open gun tower held a 20mm fast-firing cannon. With a top speed of 80 kilometers per hour, it could appear and vanish across the fighting area faster than most other vehicles could react. German crews trusted these machines. They had been told the armor would keep them safe. What they did not know was that British foot soldiers with Lee Enfield rifles, loaded with armor-piercing bullets, could destroy them from a distance of more than 150 meters. The history of the Sd.Kfz 222 starts not with its fault, but with the situation that led to its creation. After the agreement of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany faced tough limits on building up its military. Making tanks was completely forbidden. Military cars, however, fell into a confused area within the treaty rules. The German army and later, the armed forces took advantage of this opening. If they could not make tanks, they would build armored cars that served similar jobs of scouting and guarding. The time for its development lasted through the middle 1930s as German war planners sharpened their demands. They needed a vehicle that could drive out in front of moving groups, gather facts about enemy locations, survive fights with foot soldiers, and quickly pull back when facing heavier forces. Speed and the ability to move quickly were more important than heavy defense. German plans assumed that scouting groups would keep their distance from enemy units, watching and reporting instead of getting into long fights. The SDK 222 line of vehicles came from these needs. Built on a changed Horch 801 frame with drive power to all four wheels and steering on all four wheels, the vehicle showed advanced engineering for its time. The four-wheel steering system allowed very tight turns, useful for driving down tight European roads or backing up quickly when under fire. However, training books clearly told drivers to only use the four-wheel steering when driving slower than 20 kilometers per hour because of worries about losing control at faster speeds. From the outside, the vehicle seemed very up-to-date for 1937 when they started making it. The angled metal plates were not just for looks, but thoughtful design choices meant to get the most benefit from thin armor by setting it at a slope to bounce off shots. German engineers knew that slanted armor could make bullets bounce away rather than break through. The 10-sided open gun tower, protected by wire netting screens designed to turn away hand grenades, gave good sight lines for the leader and the gunner, while keeping the vehicle's weight manageable. The weapons changed while production was underway. The first vehicles held the 20mm KWK-30 rapid-fire cannon along with a 7.92mm machine gun. Early versions used the MG-13 machine gun before switching to the better MG-34 in 1938. The MG-34 became the standard through most of the war. In 1942, the fast-fire cannon was improved to the quicker-shooting KWK-38, which was more effective against light armor and airplanes. The crew of 3 worked in very small spaces. The driver sat in the front body looking out through a small armored window. The leader and gunner squeezed into the gun tower, which was hardly bigger than the inside of a small modern car. Despite the crowded space, crews valued the vehicle's reliable mechanics and performance. The Horch V8 engine, available in both 3.5-liter and 3.8-liter types depending on the model, gave enough power. The 3.5-liter engine in the early A version created 75 horsepower, while the later 3.8-liter engine in the B version delivered 90 horsepower. But the main problem was in the armor's detailed measurements. The very first 1938 production vehicle had 8 millimeters of strong, flat armor on all surfaces, even the front. To think about how thick 8 millimeters is, it is about the thickness of 4 piled-up credit cards. This armor was built to stop handgun bullets, submachine gun fire, and metal scraps from explosions far away. It could turn away rifle shots fired at an angle from far away, especially when the slanted armor made the bullets skip off. Against heavy rifle bullets meant to break through armor fired straight on and up close, it was useless. German engineers knew this limit and made changes during production. Starting in 1939, vehicles made in the middle of the production run got 14.5 millimeters of front armor. This gave better defense against rifle fire from the front, although the sides remained at 8 millimeters. The later versions, brought out in 1942, had 30 millimeters of front armor, a big improvement. However, by 1942, thousands of earlier vehicles with very little protection were still being used. And even the better models kept the thin side armor, which was easily broken by armor-piercing rifle fire. The 5 millimeter armor on the bottom and rear deck was even thinner, only good enough against shrapnel from above. German war planners had made a choice that fast movement and high speed would make up for the small amount of protection. They thought scout vehicles would stay out of close-up fighting. This idea turned out to be too hopeful when faced with the real-world fighting of World War II. German publicity focused on the vehicle's defense. Ads given to soldiers showed the slanted armor deflecting shots. Training films promised crews they had enough defense for their scouting job. The effect on morale mattered greatly. Soldiers needed to feel their vehicles offered safety, or they would be afraid to drive forward into unknown areas. The angular shape looked good and new. The wire net over the gun tower suggested smart engineering. German crews believed in their gear because they had been taught to trust it. The harsh truth appeared slowly as the war went on. In Poland in September 1939, the Sd.Kfz 222 worked very well. Polish troops, taken by surprise and armed with old guns, struggled to fight back against German scouting units. The speed and shooting power of the 222 proved key. Polish anti-tank rifles were few in number, and Polish foot soldiers mostly lacked armor-piercing bullets. The vehicles sped through Polish lands, gathering facts and causing disorder in the areas behind the lines. The early success proved that German leaders were right to be confident in the design. France in May 1940 gave a similar feeling of success. French forces, even though they had heavier tanks and cannons, were outsmarted by German team fighting methods. The Sd.K-222 was excellent in the fast push, driving ahead of tank divisions and using sudden openings. French foot soldiers, disorganized and pulling back, were little threat to the quick-moving scout vehicles. The fight finished in 6 weeks. German crews went home believing their vehicles were proven war machines. Senior officers pointed to the successful scouting operations as proof that German war technology was better than that of the Western nations. The Balkans fight in April 1941 backed up these beliefs. Yugoslavian and Greek forces, equipped with weapons from the previous war, could not effectively fight modern German armor. The mountains favored lighter, faster vehicles over heavy tanks. The 222 did well in these side conflicts against weaker enemies. By the spring of 1941, German scouting crews had been through 3 successful campaigns where their vehicles had seemed effective. They had no reason to doubt that their protection was good enough. Then came Africa. The Africa Corps arrived in Libya in February 1941. The group had been officially set up on January 11, 1941, as the German High Command reacted to Italian military failures in North Africa. Erwin Rommel, already well known for leading the 7th Panzer Division during the invasion of France, was named commander on February 11th. The first German soldiers of the 5th Light Division arrived in Tripoli on February 11th. These first forces included leading parts of the scouting units that would be the eyes and ears of the Africa Corps. The Scouting Group of Aufklärungsabteilung 3 was among the first units to reach Africa on February 14, 1941 at Tripoli. This unit, equipped with Sd.Kfz 222 armored cars among other vehicles, immediately started moving into the desert to test British positions and gather facts on enemy troop placements. The 5th Light Division would later be renamed the 21st Panzer Division on August 15, 1941, a change reflecting the growing size and strength of German activities in the area. The desert brought specific problems unlike anything German forces had seen in Europe. Huge open spaces spread out for hundreds of miles with almost no cover or places to hide. Temperatures climbed above 50 degrees Celsius during the day and dropped near freezing at night. The sharp sand got into every moving part, wearing down mechanisms and stopping up filters. Supply routes stretched back hundreds of kilometers across land with no roads or towns, making fuel and water delivery a constant difficulty. For scout vehicles like the Sd.K-222, the desert gave both good points and bad points. The open ground allowed the vehicle's speed to be fully used. Visibility extended for miles. letting scouting crews see enemy forces from very far away. The firm sand and stony ground in many areas gave good grip for the four-wheel drive system. However, the lack of hiding places meant that once seen, the vehicles had nowhere to go. The huge distances needed more fuel than the small tank capacity could hold, forcing scouting patrols to carefully figure out range and set up places to get more fuel. The 222 first worked well in these early months of the Afrika Korps' arrival. British forces, caught by surprise by the speed and forcefulness of German actions, found themselves repeatedly outsmarted. German scouting units pushed deep into British areas behind the lines, gathering facts on supply piles, main office spots, and troop movements. The speed of the Sd.K-222 proved very helpful for these quick scouting missions. Crews could approach suspicious places fast, watch from afar, and pull back before British troops could plan good defenses. The scouting group attached to the 21st Panzer Division worked constantly throughout 1941 and 1942, doing jobs that went from simple road checks to bold attacks on British buildings. Photos from the autumn of 1941 show scouting units attached to the 21st Panzer Division in Libya, using Sd.Kfz 222s often. These pictures show the vehicles in their best setting, speeding across the desert, their unique sharp shapes outlined against the sky. British forces had been fighting in the desert since Italy entered the war in June 1940. They had created fighting methods and gained skill that German forces first lacked. More importantly, British forces were well armed with modern weapons, including rifles with armor-piercing bullets. The Western Desert was about to become a harsh testing place for German gear, and the Sd.Kfz 222 would be found lacking. British troops began taking German vehicles almost right away. The back-and-forth nature of desert fighting with fast attacks and retreats across huge areas meant that broken or fuel-empty vehicles were often left behind. The first big wave came during Operation Crusader in November 1941. The operation started on November 18th, with the goal of freeing the surrounded base at Tobruk. Confused tank battles broke out around different places as British and German forces fought in messy clashes across the desert. On November 27th, British forces successfully freed Tobruk. By the middle of December, Rommel had pulled back to El Agheila. After these battles, dozens of German vehicles lay spread across the battlefield. Some had been destroyed by anti-tank fire. Others had run out of fuel, their short range proving too little for desert distances. Still others had been left when their units retreated. British collection teams carefully gathered everything they could find. Among the prizes were several Sd.Kfz 222s in different states of damage. Normal procedure ordered that taken enemy equipment be sent to the School of Tank Technology at Chertsey in Surrey for a careful look. This place, located on Chobham Lane in the countryside of Surrey, was the main British center for studying captured enemy vehicles throughout World War II. The school was part of the Military College of Science and would later become the fighting vehicle testing site. Teams from the Royal Tank Regiment and the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers did detailed technical checks of every captured vehicle, making full reports on their abilities, weaknesses, and what they meant for fighting plans. However, field leaders needed fast answers. They could not wait months for reports from England. What weapons could defeat these German vehicles? What were their faults? How should British foot soldiers and anti-tank units fight them? Repairmen and engineers working with the 8th Army started unofficial field tests behind the lines, pulling captured vehicles to safe spots to look at them closely. This method of quick field testing, followed by full study back in Britain, became the usual way of doing things throughout the war. The most famous example was Tiger 131, the German heavy tank captured in Tunisia in April 1943 during fighting near the 187th Hill, also known as Jebel Jaffa. This Tiger had been stopped by a British 6-pounder anti-tank gun hit that stuck its gun tower. The crew left the vehicle, which was later brought back by British forces. Tiger 131 was first checked in Tunisia by British engineers, eager to figure out German heavy tank technology. The vehicle was then sent to England, where it went through months of careful testing at Chertsey. The full study covered the armor type and thickness, the weapon systems, engine power, gearbox features, and every other technical part. The facts learned from this single captured vehicle greatly changed British anti-tank plans and vehicle design. The Sd.Kfz 222s taken in 1941 went through similar steps, though these light scouting vehicles naturally created less important interest than heavy tanks. Nonetheless, the careful British way of checking captured equipment meant that even quite minor vehicles got a complete technical look over. Many Sd.K-222s were shipped back to Britain over the course of the war, with each vehicle adding to the growing store of information on German scouting equipment. The first surprise was the quality of the machinery. The Horch V8 engine was beautifully built with smooth metal parts and exact construction. The four-wheel drive system worked perfectly even after war damage and desert conditions. The steering parts showed smart design, allowing all four wheels to turn for tight movement. German focus on small details was clear throughout the vehicle, from the quality of the welds to the precision of assembled pieces. These were well-made machines from a highly developed factory base. Then the repairmen checked the armor. Using measuring tools, they checked the thickness carefully and step by step. 8 millimeters on the sides, 5 millimeters on the bottom and rear deck, even allowing for the slope, which added some effective thickness by increasing the distance bullets had to pass through the steel. These numbers shocked the British engineers. One sergeant, a former car body worker from Birmingham before the war, said he had worked with regular cars that had thicker body panels. The unofficial testing began almost casually. Someone suggested they shoot at the vehicle to find out what could break through the armor. They started with pistols. 9mm shots from Webley revolvers bounced off at every distance except extremely close range. The armor was doing what it was designed to do against pistol bullets. Next came the Sten submachine gun. The 9mm shots from the Sten also mostly bounced off, though a few direct hits at very close range managed to badly dent the armor and cause some damage on the inside surface. Against pistols and submachine guns, the armor did its job. Then someone got a Lee Enfield rifle. The standard British infantry rifle using the .303 British cartridge was never meant to be a tank-fighting weapon. It was simply a rifle made for shooting enemy foot soldiers at distances up to 600 meters. The standard Mark 7 ball ammunition had a 174-grain bullet that traveled at about 2,140 feet per second. This was typical power for full-size rifle cartridges of that time, like the German 7.92mm Mauser or the American .30-06 Springfield. However, British forces also had special armor-piercing bullets for the .303 British cartridge. The W Mark I armor-piercing round had a 93-grain hard steel core and reached about 2,500 feet per second. This ammunition was specifically made to break through light armor and was developed for exactly this reason. The test requirement for armor-piercing bullets demanded that at least 60% of shots must go through 8 millimeters of armor plate at 175 yards. The repairmen loaded several W Mark I armor-piercing rounds. One of them, who had been a competition shooter before the war, took aim at the side of the vehicle from about 50 yards away. He chose a flat part of the body where the armor was straight on to his view, rather than one of the angled parts. He aimed carefully and fired. The armor-piercing bullet shot right through. The entrance hole was neat and round on the outside face. The exit hole on the inside was rough and larger with metal pieces peeled back from the hit. The repairmen gathered around to check the result, feeling the holes with their fingers. They fired several more shots at different angles and distances. At ranges under 100 yards with straight-on hits, the W Mark I armor-piercing ammunition consistently broke through the 8mm side armor. At longer ranges or with slanted hits, breaking through became less certain, but under normal fighting situations, a British foot soldier with armor-piercing bullets could defeat the armor. The meaning of this spread quickly through the 8th Army. Intelligence officers put together reports. Tank crews were told. Foot soldier units got updated fighting advice. The supposed armored German scouting vehicle could be effectively fought by foot soldiers with the right bullets. British soldiers no longer needed to wait for anti-tank guns or ask for tank help when they saw Sd.Kfz 222s. A rifleman with armor-piercing rounds could stop the vehicle and kill its crew. More testing looked at other weapons. The boy's anti-tank rifle, a 55 caliber gun firing 13.9mm by 99mm bullets, broke through 23.2 millimeters of armor at 100 yards. This was far too much power against the 222, but it proved that British anti-tank rifles would easily destroy the vehicle. The 2-pounder anti-tank gun, a 40mm weapon that was the main British anti-tank gun through most of the desert fight, could break through the 222's armor at any realistic fighting distance. Tank crews were told that even their coaxial 7.92mm machine guns could break through the armor at close range if they focused fire on one spot. The knowledge went beyond British forces. Commonwealth units from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and India got similar information reports. Free French forces learned about the weakness. As the war moved ahead and Allied forces grew, the facts spread widely. The Sd.Kfz 222's thin armor became widely known among Allied foot soldiers, completely changing how they handled meetings with these vehicles. Soviet forces made their own separate discoveries. On August 23, 1941, the Red Army showed off a captured German Sd.Kfz 221 scout car, the smaller, older version of the 222, near Moscow. On September 7th, one captured Sd.Kfz 222 was moved to the gas factory at Gorky for a detailed check. Gas Chief Engineer Vitaly Grychev and other engineers looked at the vehicle thoroughly, checking size, testing materials, and judging the design features. Grychev was especially impressed by the highly angled armor plate, set up to cause the most bullet skipping. Although Soviet engineers had already begun work on their own light armored car design on July 17, 1941, the inspection of the German vehicle affected the final look. The BA-64 light armored car, which started production in April 1942, used a body shape somewhat like that of the German vehicle. The design of many angled armor plates was taken straight from the German plan. However, Soviet engineers learned from German mistakes. The BA-64 had 9 millimeters of armor on the sides, slightly thicker than the German vehicle, though still weak against armor-piercing rifle fire. More importantly, Soviet designers understood that light armored cars were definitely weak against modern anti-tank weapons and planned the vehicle to reflect that, accepting limits while making it easy to produce in large numbers. The BA-64 was much smaller than the Sd.Kfz 222 with a two-man crew instead of three. It was lighter, weighing only 2.4 tons compared to the German vehicle's 4.8 tons. It was cheaper to make, using parts from already existing Soviet truck and car production. Most importantly, it was easier to make in big numbers. The gas factory at Gorky could manufacture BA-64s on the same building lines that produced GAZ-64 Jeeps, sharing parts and tools to speed up production. Soviet production thinking was very different from German ideas. Rather than making a small number of complex vehicles with fancy features like four-wheel steering, Soviet factories produced huge amounts of simpler vehicles that were suitable for their jobs. About 9,110 BA-64 models were built between 1942 and 1946. This included 3901 original BA-64 models from 1942 to 1943 and 5209. Improved BA-64B models from 1943 to 1946. This total production completely overshadowed the fewer than 1,000 Sd.Kfz 222s made over 6 years. The BA-64 stayed in Soviet use until the early to mid-1950s, long after the Sd.K 222 had been stopped from German service. The Soviet vehicle was sent to many Allied nations including Poland, Czechoslovakia, China, North Korea, and Yugoslavia. It saw fighting in many conflicts after the war. Its long life and widespread use stood in sharp contrast to the small number made and quick outdating of its German inspiration. British forces developed their own light armored cars, including the Daimler armored car and the Humber armored car. Both had significantly better armor defense than the Sd.Kfz 222. The Daimler, starting service in 1941, had 16 millimeters of armor on the hull sides and 30 millimeters on the front. This gave real defense against rifle fire, including armor-piercing bullets at typical fighting ranges. The Daimler held a 2-pounder anti-tank gun, making it far more deadly against enemy armor than the 20-millimeter fast-fire cannon of the German vehicle. The difference between these similar vehicles shows how different nations approach the armored car design problem. Germany put speed and quickness first, accepting very little armor protection. Britain put shooting power and good defense first, accepting somewhat less quickness. The Soviet Union put high numbers of production and low cost first, accepting limits in both defense and complexity. Fighting experience suggested the British approach worked best for armored cars expected to fight in disputed areas, while the Soviet approach was great for giving enough vehicles to units that badly needed them. American forces entering the Desert War in late 1942 did their own checks of captured German vehicles. American weapons teams arrived with scientific ways of checking things, doing systematic shooting tests and writing detailed technical reports. They tested American weapons against German armor to give fighting facts to soldiers who would soon face these vehicles in battle. The M1903 Springfield rifle, the standard American bolt-action rifle from World War I, that was still in use alongside the newer M1 Garand, fired the .30-06 Springfield cartridge. The M2 armor-piercing round for this cartridge, known by its black bullet tip, was specifically made to defeat light armor. Official details required a minimum of 10.667 millimeters of armor penetration at 100 yards. Field testing showed penetration up to 12.7 millimeters at 100 yards, which was much more than the 8 millimeter armor thickness of the Sd.Kfz 222. The newer M1 Garand, firing the same .30-06 Springfield cartridge but in a semi-automatic rifle, offered the same armor-piercing power with the benefit of faster follow-up shots. American foot soldiers could fight German armored cars with certainty using M2 armor-piercing bullets. The reports noted that German armored cars could be successfully fought by infantry, with their standard rifles loaded with armor-piercing rounds, which was useful information for troops meeting them for the first time in Tunisia. American testing also checked submachine guns and carbines. The Thompson submachine gun, firing the relatively low-power 45 ACP pistol cartridge, could not break through the armor except at point-blank range with many shots to the same spot. The M1 carbine, firing the medium-power 30 caliber carbine cartridge, had only a small chance of breaking through. At close range under 50 yards, it could sometimes break through the thinnest rear armor, but not dependably. These tests confirmed that the 8 millimeter armor gave good protection against lighter weapons, just not against full-power rifle cartridges loaded with armor-piercing bullets. The difference between standard ball ammunition and armor-piercing ammunition was key. Standard rifle bullets with soft cores could not reliably break through 8 millimeters of steel armor at realistic fighting distances. The armor did what it was designed to do against such bullets. However, armor-piercing ammunition with hardened steel cores was specifically made to defeat light armor. British, American, and Soviet forces all had and gave out armor-piercing rifle bullets to foot soldier units, especially in units expected to meet armored vehicles. The supply of armor-piercing ammunition changed by unit and situation. Not every soldier carried armor-piercing rounds as standard issue. However, it was common practice to give out small amounts of armor-piercing ammunition to infantry units operating in areas where they might meet light armored vehicles. Squad leaders, special shooters, and anti-tank teams regularly carried armor-piercing bullets. When information showed German scouting units were operating nearby, extra armor-piercing rounds would be given out. The angle of impact played a major role in how well the shot broke through. The Sd.Kfz 222's angled armor design increased the slant, making the armor effectively thicker and encouraging shots to bounce off. A bullet hitting at a 60-degree angle from straight on had to pass through significantly more steel than the basic 8 millimeter thickness. This is why German engineers designed the vehicle with metal plates at extreme angles. Even armor-piercing bullets might skip off instead of penetrating. However, in real-world fighting, armored cars often showed straight-on or almost straight-on surfaces to enemy fire. The sides of the vehicle, where the 8 millimeter armor was flattest, were weak whenever the vehicle drove parallel to enemy positions or turned to shoot at targets. The flat rear deck and back plates were even weaker. German crews learned to avoid situations where their sides or rear were open to enemy foot soldiers, but in flowing combat, such openness was often unavoidable. By late 1942, the weakness of the Sd.K 222 was well recorded across many armies and fighting areas. German scouting units operating in the desert, in Russia, in Italy, and later in France, all faced enemies who knew that rifle fire with armor-piercing bullets could defeat the vehicle. The end was near for the 222 in frontline scouting jobs. The vehicle that had worked well in Poland, France, and the Balkans, where good roads, weaker enemies, and shorter campaigns had hidden its flaws, was becoming less and less useful against well-equipped Allied and Soviet forces. The thin armor, perfectly fine in 1938 against the military technology of that time, had become a deadly risk by 1943. Ace armor-piercing ammunition became standard issue across Allied armies. German military leaders realized the problem of poor scouting vehicle protection by early 1942. Battle reports from Africa and Russia constantly pointed out the weakness of the Sd.Kfz 222 line of vehicles' autonomy fire. Unit commanders asked for vehicles with better protection. Crew reports listed times when vehicles were lost to rifle fire or light weapons that should not have been able to break through armor. The response was the development of the Sd.Kfz 234 line, known as the Puma. This 8-wheeled armored car represented what German scouting plans should have called. For from the start, the vehicle had 30 millimeters off-front armor and 14.5 millimeters on the sides and rear, finally giving real defense against rifle fire including armor-piercing bullets. The slanted armor design made the protection work best, and the total defense could stop most infantry weapons and many light anti-tank weapons. The Puma held a 50mm KWK-39L60 gun, the same weapon used on later versions of the Panzer III medium tank. This gave German scouting units real anti-tank ability for the first time. The 8-wheeled setup gave excellent movement across open land, with the vehicle able to reach 85 km/h on roads and keep a good speed over rough ground. The crew of 4 worked in much better conditions than the cramped 3-man crew of the Sd.Kfz 222. However, this capable vehicle arrived too late to make a big difference to German success. Development and manufacturing delays meant the first Pumas did not reach frontline units until late 1943. By that time, Germany was fighting hard on many fronts with its factory capacity stretched thin. Only slightly more than 100 Pumas had been built by the end of 1943. Production continued through 1944, reaching about 400 total vehicles before the production line stopped in September 1944, as Allied bombing and lack of materials crippled German industry. 400 vehicles could not possibly replace the hundreds of Sd.Kfz 222 still in use across many fighting areas, nor could they meet the scouting needs of dozens of German divisions. The Puma, despite being an excellent design that finally balanced defense with movement and shooting power, appeared in too few numbers too late to change anything. Meanwhile, less capable but more numerous vehicles like the Sd.Kfz 222 remained in frontline service because there were no other choices. Making of the Sd.Kfz 222 itself stopped in late 1943, after about 990 vehicles had been made between 1937 and 1943. This production total included many versions with changing details. The earliest vehicles from 1937 and 1938 were the basic design with 8mm armor all around, and the 3.5-liter engine producing 75 horsepower. The mid-production update in 1939 brought 14.5mm of front armor, while keeping the 8mm side armor. This change showed a growing understanding that the vehicle needed better protection, at least from the front where it would most often face enemy fire when going toward or away from them. However, cost and weight concerns stopped them from upgrading the side armor, leaving the basic weakness intact. The AUSFB version brought out in 1942 was the most important update. The 30mm front armor finally gave real defense against rifle fire from the front. The more powerful 3.8-liter engine, delivering 90 horsepower, made up for the added weight. The faster-firing KWK-38 rapid-fire cannon replaced the earlier KWK-30, offering better performance against aircraft and light armored targets. These improvements came too late for most vehicles already in use, and even the AUSFB kept the weak 8mm side armor that could be defeated by armor-piercing rifle fire. Related versions in the 22 series included the Sd.Kfz 221, a smaller 2-man vehicle with similar armor problems, and the Sd.Kfz 223, which was the radio-equipped command version, having extra radio gear but the same weak armor. The Sd.Kfz 260 and 261 were even more specialized command versions. All shared the main weakness of not having enough side armor protection. Many 222s were slowly moved to security jobs in the back areas, convoy escort, fighting against local resistance, and training roles where the enemy was less likely to have heavy weapons or enough supplies of armor-piercing ammunition. In these second-tier jobs, the vehicle's speed, reliability, and shooting power remained strong points. The 20mm rapid-fire cannon was deadly against unarmored vehicles and effective for holding back foot soldiers. Against resistance fighters armed with basic rifles and limited bullets, the 8mm armor might still give enough defense. Some vehicles lasted until the end of the war in May 1945, though by that point they were completely out of date for frontline service. The fast movement of Allied armies in the West and Soviet forces in the East in 1944 and 1945 overpowered German defense abilities. Scouting vehicles, no matter what kind, had little effect on the final outcome. The war was being won by tanks, artillery, aircraft, and the huge amount of industrial production by the Allied powers. What made the Sd.Kfz 222 especially important from a historical point of view was not how well it fought, but what it showed about military design choices and the way battlefield technology changed. The vehicle was great at almost everything, except the one thing that mattered most for the crew's safety. It was fast. reaching 80 kilometers per hour on good roads and keeping a good speed even on rough ground. It was mechanically trustworthy when kept up properly. With the Hork engine proving tough under hard conditions, the vehicle gave great sight lines for its crew, which was key for scouting work. The commander had good views from the open gun tower, though this also meant weakness to overhead dangers like grenades and air-bursting artillery. The handling qualities were praised by German crews, with the four-wheel steering allowing quick turns and fast repositioning. The acceleration was sharp, allowing rapid escapes from dangerous spots. The weapons were effective for their planned job. The 20mm rapid-fire cannon, whether the Kwk-30 or the later Kwk-38 version, could tear up unarmored vehicles and was dangerous even to light tanks up close. The firing speed allowed for constant pressure on enemy positions. The coaxial machine gun was great for fighting foot soldiers and could be used separately from the main gun. The amount of bullets it could carry, while limited by the small size, was enough for typical scouting jobs. If the vehicle had been built with just 12 or 15 millimeters of armor on the sides instead of 8, it would have been much more likely to survive rifle fire while still being light enough to keep its speed advantages. The extra weight would have been manageable. The effect on performance would have been small, but this armor upgrade would have put the vehicle into a different weight class, needing a more powerful engine, stronger suspension, and eventually driving up costs and complexity. This shows the basic struggle in armored vehicle design. Every extra pound of armor adds cost, reduces speed, increases fuel use, requires a stronger engine, and creates maintenance problems. Designers must find a balance between protection and all other needs. Sometimes the balance works. Sometimes, as with the Sd.Kfz 222, the balance fails and soldiers suffer the cost with their lives. The calculated chance that German planners took in the mid-1930s did not pay off. They bet that speed and quick movement would make up for little protection. They thought scout vehicles would work at safe distances, watching instead of fighting. They underestimated how often their light armored cars would find themselves taking shots from rifles up close. The fast, messy nature of World War II combat, especially in the huge spaces of Russia and the open ground of the desert, meant that the fancy plan about scouting units staying far away rarely matched what really happened. British intelligence reports put together in 1943 for distribution to Commonwealth forces carefully listed every weakness of the vehicle. The paper specified armor thickness at different points, named the best aiming spots for various weapons, and gave fighting recommendations for how to attack it. Tank crews were told they could break through the vehicle with coaxial machine guns up close. Anti-tank gun crews were told not to waste rare armor-piercing bullets on armored cars, when high-explosive rounds would be enough and were more available. Foot soldiers got especially detailed advice. Their ports reminded soldiers that their rifles, so often thought of as weak against armor, could be deadly against the German scout vehicles when loaded with armor-piercing ammunition. Suggested fighting distances, best angles of impact, and the importance of focused fire were all clearly stated. British training included this information, making sure that soldiers understood they were not helpless against German armor and had real ways to defend themselves. The weakness went beyond just the armor thickness. The open gun tower, while giving great visibility, left the crew open to overhead dangers. Hand grenades, mortar rounds, and air-bursting artillery could kill or wound crew members even without breaking through the hull. The wire mesh screen over the turret opening gave some defense against grenades thrown directly in, but could not stop fragments from explosions nearby. The cramped inside meant that any shot that broke through was likely to cause injuries. With 3 crew members packed into a space barely bigger than a modern compact car, a single armor-piercing round entering the crew area could wound or kill multiple people. Splintering, where metal pieces broke off the inside surface of armor upon impact, even without full penetration, created deadly bits of metal that flew around inside the small space. The limited bullet storage and fuel capacity created extra problems. The vehicle could only carry a small amount of 20mm rapid-fire cannon rounds and machine gun ammunition. Once used up in a long gunfight, the vehicle was only armed with the crew's small guns. The fuel tanks, though covered by the thin armor, could be set on fire by tracer or incendiary rounds that went through the hull. The tires, thought tougher than usual for the time, were still easily broken by gunfire. A vehicle stopped by broken tires became an easy target, taking away its main way of surviving: speed and movement. Crews stopped by tire damage had to leave their vehicle or try repairs while being shot at. Neither choice was good when facing enemy foot soldiers with armor-piercing bullets. German crews, to their great credit, continued doing scouting missions with whatever vehicles they were given, including the weak Sd.Kfz 222s. Many showed amazing courage, knowing or suspecting their armor was not good enough, but following orders anyway. Scouting is naturally dangerous work, requiring soldiers to check enemy positions, gather information, and often risk their lives to give commanders the facts needed for bigger operations. The Sd.Kfz 222 served throughout the war in many fighting areas, despite its known problems because Germany simply did not have enough replacement vehicles to retire the whole fleet. Production priorities focused on tanks, assault guns, and other fighting vehicles seen as more important for defense. Scouting vehicles, while necessary, received less focus as German industry struggled to replace huge equipment losses on the Eastern Front and to fight back against Allied strategic bombing. Several examples of the Sd.K 222 remain in museums today, kept safe as historical objects showing German military technology of the late 1930s and early 1940s. The Weald Foundation keeps a real Sd.Kfz 222 specimen, the Bovington Tank Museum, the Australian War Memorial, and various other places have examples captured during the war. The vehicle at the American Heritage Museum was taken during the Desert Campaign in 1943 and sent to England for checking at Chertsey. Modern visitors examining these kept vehicles can see the thin armor plates for themselves, instantly understanding why Allied soldiers found them weak once they started shooting at them with armor-piercing bullets. Running hands over the 8mm side plates, visitors gain a clear understanding of just how minimal the protection really was. The angular shape and slanted surfaces that looked impressive in publicity pictures translate into surprisingly thin metal when checked up close. The Sd.Kfz 222 represents a warning story in military vehicle design, showing what happens when designers guess wrong about the right mix between protection and speed. It shows how vehicles built well for early war conditions can become useless as weapons technology changes and enemies adapt their methods. It shows how decisions made at the drawing board in peacetime can have deadly results for soldiers years later, when those vehicles face fighting conditions their designers never expected. The story also shows the importance of battlefield information and Allied nations working together in military actions. The quick sharing of knowledge about the vehicle's weaknesses across British, Commonwealth, Soviet, and American forces meant that Allied foot soldiers worldwide understood they had effective ways to fight back. This sharing of information prevented needless deaths and increased soldier confidence when facing German scouting units. From a wider historical view, the Sd.Kfz 222I is an example of the technology and factory competition that defined World War II. Every nation tried hard to balance competing demands for defense, speed, shooting power, reliability, and cost. Every design meant trade-offs that favored some features while accepting weaknesses in others. The Sd.Kfz 222 specific trade-offs worked well in the early war, but failed as the conflict changed and enemies adapted. The vehicle's story continues to influence modern military vehicle design. Current light armored vehicles and infantry fighting vehicles face similar difficulties, balancing defense against speed and cost. Modern materials like layered armor and ceramic plates offer better protection at lower weight than the heavy steel of World War II. But the basic struggle remains. Every kilogram added for defense reduces movement and increases fuel use. The Sd.K 222 also serves as a sad reminder of the human price of bad technology. Behind every shot-through armor plate was a crew member who believed their vehicle gave safety. German soldiers got into these vehicles, trusting that their country's engineers and military leaders had provided them with good enough equipment. The discovery that this trust was misplaced, that their armor could be defeated by regular rifle fire, must have been terrifying. When those Allied repairmen behind British lines in the desert found out that rifles loaded with armor-piercing bullets could break through the German armored car, they'd come across one of the Wehrmacht's lesser-known weaknesses. It was not a war-winning discovery. The Sd.K 222 was a scouting vehicle, not a tank, and its presence or lack did not change big war plans. But for individual soldiers facing these vehicles, knowing their rifles were effective weapons rather than useless against armor was powerfully important knowledge. It meant they could fight back. It meant they were not helpless. The 8mm of steel that German engineers thought would give enough protection turned out to be barely adequate against the lightest weapons and completely useless against armor-piercing rifle ammunition. That thin armor, tested in controlled settings and approved through military paperwork, failed when faced with combat realities where bullets arrived from unexpected angles at close ranges. German crews paid for that engineering mistake with their lives. The revelation spread through Allied forces, and the Sd.Kfz, once feared for its speed and shooting power, became known simply as another weak target. Not impossible to beat, not even especially hard to defeat, just a vehicle with thin armor that could be broken through by infantry weapons when loaded with the right bullets. The truth was revealed, and every Allied soldier learned to see past the strong-angled look to the weak reality underneath.